Shabbat Shalom. There's a story that lurks in our family lore. I don't know that I've ever heard it told outright, but it's there. Fuzzy around the edges, bleeding into every day. When my grandfather was a young boy, his father died tragically. He went out duck hunting, got pneumonia, and without antibiotics, the infection quickly took his life. My great-grandmother was heartbroken, but she was also terrified. It was 1927. At that time, women did not work outside the home except under extreme duress. And there were no federally funded social safety nets. FDR's New Deal wouldn't come for another 8 years. And so my great-grandmother really did not know how she and her young son would survive. My grandfather remembered her anger, her fury, that no one in her family stepped up to help her in the ways she needed after the sudden loss of her husband. She became so upset that she cut off her family. My great-grandmother was amazing. She went on to become a school teacher. She somehow managed to raise my grandfather on her meager salary and even saved enough for retirement. Her dire straits were only temporary, but the rift in the family became permanent. My grandfather grew up without a connection to his extended family. So did my mom and her siblings. So did we. This week, the New York Times posted a chilling article about the rise of elective estrangements in this country, particularly since COVID-19. Interestingly, it used to be that there were estrangements. People cut family members off, but it was often out of deep pain or brokenness that just could not be resolved, an option of last resort. But now there are mental health social media influencers, that's a thing, who are promoting this idea of elective estrangement, cutting off your family as a way of liberating yourself, allowing yourself to move forward in health and strength and resilience towards the future, sometimes without even trying to work out the conflicts that were driving the estrangement in the first place. The stories in that article were harrowing. There was one young woman, Jess. She started doing therapy as a young adult and was processing these painful memories from her childhood. At first, she was working with therapists who were encouraging her to try to work this through with her family, to process her feelings and talk about it. But then she came across the work of somebody local, actually, Patrick Tehan, who's a licensed social worker here in Massachusetts, who's one of the leaders of the no contact movement. That's what it's called. And she was persuaded by his charisma and his persona and by his professional credentials, and came to believe that her best option for processing these emotions, these feelings, these memories that were coming up was to cut off her family. It was no panacea, it was hard. She shared that after she cut off her family, she felt utterly alone. She says, "I would love to be able to pick up the phone and call my mom. But instead, every time she has the urge, she watches another one of Patrick Tehan's videos to strengthen her resolve to stay cut off." In a conversation with reporter Ellen Berry, her mom sobbed uncontrollably. She's devastated. She shared, "It's kind of like a grieving process, but I don't understand how she died or why she died. I just don't understand what happened." Diane is not alone. Her mother is not alone. This article documented case after case, support group after support group. Now, some young adults are cutting off their parents for legitimate reasons, for serious abuse, for reasons that it was just impossible. But other young adults are cutting off family members for seemingly trivial reasons. One parent profiled in the article, Brian Driscoll, is a therapist himself in Texas. And he shared that his daughter, his 18-year-old daughter, 2 summers ago, cut him off because she said he favored her brother and it was hard to get his attention. He felt like he did everything he could. He was a good father, he thought. He went to all our performances. I mean, he's in the mental health field. He specializes in working out conflict in families. But when she sent him a no-contact letter in the mail, there was literally nothing he could do. And he said that that loss has been the most painful loss of his whole entire life, even more painful than the death of his father or his recent divorce. If you look closely at each one of these stories, there's one simple truth. At core, there's a person who is deeply, deeply hurting. Used to be, people were trained to swallow those emotions, to just grin and bear it and get through and don't say anything. But this generation has been taught about the importance of speaking your truth. They're much more comfortable articulating their feelings, their pain, their vulnerability, their suffering. But instead of using this skill to work things through, to become more resilient, there's this movement to take this understanding. I know that trauma can have a deleterious effect on my life, on my ability to function, and so I'm just going to look for trauma wherever I can find it, which has meant that the definition of trauma keeps expanding and expanding and expanding, and there's this movement to just excise anything and everything that could be traumatic. On college campuses, this looks like trigger warnings, which now more than 50% of college professors have trigger warnings. They warn against violence and racism and ageism and sexism and ableism, and the list goes on and on and on. And in these warnings, it's so interesting, in these warnings, there's this implicit idea that you should not have to encounter ideas that make you uncomfortable, and if you do, you should do so with caution and remove. And there's an interesting secondary effect that the more we warn about this subject's coming up, the more we train young people to believe that I don't have to build the skills to process things that make me uncomfortable. If there's something that's problematic, it's the fault of that idea, that concept, that thing out there, and I just need to be removing myself from it. Interestingly, the research has shown that trigger warnings actually increase stress rather than decreasing it. When we're warned about something that's coming, our stress reaction goes up. And so that means that the more we're focused on getting rid of all the trauma in our lives, the more trauma we experience and suffer from. It's a paradox. And here are these young people who are so determined, so working so hard, and rightfully so, to build a beautiful life, a strong life, a resilient life. And yet with everything they cut off, they limit their sphere more and more and more. They're unwittingly closing themselves off from the possibility of growth and transformation. Our tradition takes a very different approach. In the Torah, God calls us Bnei Yisrael, the people of Israel. And that name comes from a crucial moment in the trajectory and development of our people. Our ancestor Jacob has his own family feud. And his mother doesn't have the tools to solve it when he steals the birthright. She says, you got to get out of here, you got to run, you got to go. On the run, he meets an adversary, an angel who wrestles with him all night. He sustains an injury, but he keeps fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and wrestling with a thing that makes him uncomfortable, which literally endangers his life. And when dawn comes, he demands a blessing. The angel gives him the blessing of Israel, because you have wrestled with divine. We take on this name of the people of Israel because we are a people, we believe strongly in the power of wrestling. We belong to a tradition that believes that we are stronger for contradictory opinions, for ideas that challenge us, for coming in contact with things that sometimes make us feel uncomfortable, that all of those views strengthen our character. We come from a tradition that believes in tshuva, from a tradition that believes that every person is capable of growing and changing and becoming the person that we're meant to be, that we are all capable of healing relationships. And we come from a tradition that believes so strongly in tikkun olam, that yes, the world is broken, but each one of us was placed here for a reason, to do our own work of healing. To do that, you got to get your hands dirty. Which brings me back to my family. So my great-grandmother, she never worked things through with her family. She was so angry. She left this world angry. Fast forward, almost a century later, I randomly ended up going to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And even though I grew up in a crunchy granola shul, I ended up davening at the Orthodox shul there. And one day at the Orthodox synagogue, I met this man named Moshe, who shared my great-grandmother's last name. Met him at Kiddush, we were chatting, and the whole time I don't even think I heard a single word he said, because the whole time all I could think was, is it possible we're related? Could this person be a family member? I mean, how many people share this name? I didn't say anything. I didn't have the guts. But we developed a friendship, and I would see him at Shabbat, and we would talk at Kiddush. He has a passion for Jewish learning in general, and a particular love for a pluralistic yeshiva in Jerusalem called Pardes, Mechon Pardes. He loves it so much he even sponsors a scholarship for Vanderbilt students to go there. So he told me about this yeshiva. He kept telling me over and over again, you've got to go. And because of him, and because of the generosity of his scholarship, I spent the year after college in Jerusalem and landed at his dinner table for Thanksgiving that year. It took me that whole time to work up the courage, and somehow at the dinner table, I said, it's a funny thing, I think we might be related. So he pulled down, there's a book of genealogy that a distant other cousin has created. He pulls down the book, and we looked it up, and sure enough, we're connected, we're related. And that connection has enriched our lives immeasurably. It's healed this generational rift that we never knew might be possible. It's remarkable this way that the stories of our lives are always unfolding, always evolving, always changing. Our challenge is to get to a place where we can encounter whatever comes up with an open mind and an open heart, to resist the urge to cut away anything that might escalate to trauma, and to hold on to what should be an old adage: don't cut off your own to spite your fate.